So what I've done here, welcome everybody, is a showing the flow, the argument flow, so of the sugia that we're studying. So the brisa tells us that there's chumras, that means strictnesses ensure that bore doesn't have. And here you can see the list there. Okay, Shore pays kofar if he kills a human being. If it's an eved, he has to pay shloshim shkalim. If when the trial is over and the ox is sentenced to be gored, so the owner cannot get any benefit from it. Okay, it's called asabahano. He can't sell it or shecht it. Also,
what is kofar again, please?
A kofar it's a little bit long discussion. The Gemara, kofar is a atonement. He has to pay the value of the he has to pay the value of the person who he killed to the Yerushim, to the inheritors. Okay. And that, of course, doesn't exist. All these things don't exist in bor, and of course, the shore moves and the bor is passive. And the Mishnah says all these chumras don't exist in bor. Okay. Now, what the Mishnah does. So now let's go back to my chart here. I'll try to. There we go. Click forward. Why doesn't it click? Okay, so we're going to stop the share. We're going to start the share again. And we're going to start the share again. Okay. Oh, so this Mishnah, the first thing that the Gemara informs us is that this Mishnah cannot go according to the rabbi's opinion. Why? Because there's if this Mishnah was according to the rabbis, then there would be another distinction. What's the distinction? That is sure if he kicks a kli, for instance, he gets some sort of kalim, a mingvaz, so the owner has to pay for it. But if an animal falls into a pit, let's say, and he has, here's very good. Rabbi Aaron was trying. But if an animal falls in, hello, Rabbi Aaron. Oh, are you there? So he's very shy. He has his black screen on. Something wrong with his screen. Shalom, Rabbi Aaron. We can't hear you, but I hope you hear us. Okay. Okay. So according to the rabbis, if an animal falls into a pit and there's kalim on the animal, vases on the animal, and the animal gets hurt or dies, and the kalim, the vessels are broken, so you don't have to pay for the vessels. Okay, that's how the rabbis learn. So that's another distinction between the shore and the pit. The shore, you have to pay for vessels that you destroyed, and the pit, you don't pay for the vessels that you destroyed. Okay, so the fact that it wasn't mentioned in this list leads the Gemara to say that this text, this brisa, cannot be according to the Rabbanan, because according to the rabbis, there would be a fifth distinction over here. Okay, good. So that's the first move of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, okay, so it must be that this Reisha is Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the rabbis, and he says if an animal falls into a pit and he has vessels on his back, the owner does have to pay. Okay, so you would have to pay. So this brisa that doesn't bring up this distinction between the shore and the bore, between the ox and the pit, is Rabbi Yehuda. Because why is it not mentioned, the distinction? Because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't have the distinction. They're both obligated according to him. Okay, so that's the second move of the Gemara. So now the Gemara brings the second part of this brisa. The second part of the brisa, I'm going to try to make that screen bigger here so you can see a little better. The second part of the brisa tells us not only is there a distinction between the shore and the bore, but there's a distinction between the aish and the bore. Actually, it's not the second one. I think it's the fourth one. Okay, or the third one actually. Okay, third one. But whatever, the aish, there's a distinction between aish and bore. What does that mean? The aish, of course, is dark and lele chazik. It's something that moves and the bore doesn't. But the aish also is chayiv on things which are fitting for it to eat and fitting and not fitting for it to eat. We'll discuss what that means in 1 second. And the bore is not. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, what does it mean that the aish is obligated on things that are fitting for it and not? It says, well, if wood gets burnt by a fire, then the owner of the bore of the aish, has to pay. And if the some kalim, for instance, got burnt and exploded by the fire, you'd have to pay also. Now, kalim vessels are not things which a fire normally consumes. Fire normally consumes wood. So it says that you would be obligated on both wood and vessels, which is not true in bore, meaning that you would not be obligated on vessels, only on things which are fitting for the bore, but excuse me, but I'm sorry, I'm saying that wrong. You would be obligated on vessels. Okay, I'm sorry, it's not true. Hold 1 second, I just got confused myself. The eish people, sha'eish talking has umodim lechol ben uben davar shein be'uilah. So masha'ein came before. What's the davar kalim? And therefore you would be chayav in eish on kalim, and you would putter on kalim and bor. That's the position of the Rabbanan. That's the rabbi's position. They say you don't pay one for kalim that fall on the bor. So we have this brisa with these 4 sections can't be the position of the Rabbanan, because the Sefer clearly can't be the position of Rebbe Yehuda. It must be the position of the Rabbanan. Okay, because the second part of the brisa goes according to the Rabbanan. So you can't say that the first part is Rebbe Yehuda and they left out kalim, because here we see in the second part it's definitely the Rabbanan, so it's not Rebbe Yehuda. So we have to now that's why I put a stop sign here. We have to now reject the fact that this brisa is Rebbe Yehuda, because it was Rebbe Yehuda, very nice. It works very nice in the first part of the brisa, but not in the second part, because Rebbe Yehuda says that you are chayav kalim bor, so that wouldn't be a distinction between aish and fire, and yet the distinction is made. So the Gemara now drops the idea that this Mishnah is Rebbe Yehuda. It goes back and says, no, the Mishnah must be the Rabbanan. The question is, if the Mishnah is the Rabbanan, we started off saying, wait a minute, the Rabbanan make a distinction between kalim, between shore and bor, meaning that the shore is chayav and kalim, the bor is patur kalim, and we said that's left out of the list. So how could the Reisha be the Rabbanan? The Sefer is the Rabbanan, very nice. It makes a distinction between aish and bor, that in aish you're chayav on kalim, bor you're patur on kalim, but it doesn't fit with the Reisha because it's left out. It should have been put in. So the Gemara gives an answer that's called Tane V'Shayer. Tane V'Shayer. What does Tane V'Shayer mean? It means that the Tana of the Mishnah taught, but also left things out. How does that work? So the Mishnah, as we mentioned many times, a very short document, very brief, very concise, never telling you more than what you need. So on one hand, it's very short. And if there's extra words or extra cases, we say, is this Tana a peddler that he has to show all his wares? Usually a person that sells perfume goes around to the homes and he had all these different spices, right? And he shows all these different spices, 50 different spices. But the Tana doesn't have to tell you 50 different things. He only has to tell you the important things. However, so when we say that this case is left out, our first position is, wait a minute, it can't be the Rabbanan, because if it was the Rabbanan, this case would have been put in. It's another distinction between shore and bor. But now we're going to say, no, we have another principle called Tana V'Shaya. If there's a long list, the Tana sometimes doesn't write everything, okay? What is considered a long list? It has to be at least two items have to be left out. So if there's a list of 5 things and the Tana leaves out 1, so we say, no, that's no good. It cannot be him, because he'll never leave out just 1 thing. But if it's a long list and he leaves out 2 or more, then we have this principle of Tana V'Shaya. The Tana doesn't have to write down every single case. So what we're saying here is that really the Bryce is really the Rabbanan, and the second position here works very well. And this first position that left out the difference between the shore and the bor, that the shore is chayav on kelim and the bor is not. The reason it's left out is because the Tana had a very long list of things, and he left that one out. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, we have a rule: if the Tana leaves something out, he has to leave 2 things out. That's called Tana V'Shaya. So the Gemara says, Tana V'Shaya, my Shire, the high Shire. What? You can't just leave out 1 thing, Caleb, in the ratio. He has to leave something else. So what else did he leave out? He left out Tumun. What does Tumun mean? A fire is doesn't pay for things that are hidden. The pasuk says the fire eats a hakama. Hakama is standing grain, and they learn out from there that if, say, a person had a stack of grain and he hid his important documents or papers or vessels or anything inside that haystack, and everything got burnt up. So when it comes to fire, fire doesn't pay for hidden things. It's called tamun. But if a person, let's say an animal there'd be a sack carrying a lot of small vessels, and the animal kicked the sack, even though that those vessels are hidden in the sack, the owner has to pay. So when it comes to shore, you have to pay for things which are hidden. When it comes to Aish, you don't pay things which are hidden. So that's the second thing that was left out. The first thing that was left out in the Reisha, in this first part, is Kalim. The Tana didn't say that you have to pay for Kalim when a shore breaks Kli, but not when a bor breaks Kalim. That was left out. And the second thing that was left out was in the Sefer, this idea of Tamun, of hidden things. So our Mishnah really is the Rabbanan, and the rabbis didn't write all the distinctions, and the 2 they left out was in the ratio. They left out the difference between the shore and the bor, was that you chayav on the shore on Kalim and Patra on the bor and Kalim. And in the Sefer here, in this with Aish and bor, they left out the fact that you're chayav on Aish only for things which are revealed, and your putter on hidden things, and the bor you chayav on hidden things also. So if an animal falls into a bor and he's got a whole bunch of kalim in his sack, and you break the kalim, you have to pay. No, yeah, exactly. No, your putter on came on. It's right. The Rabbanan, you don't pay. I'm sorry. Your putter on kalim. There's nothing to do with Talmud here. Okay, so Aish you're chayav on Taman, but let's say not Kalim. Let's say you had a sack full of grain, right? And it fell into a pit, and the grain got all dirty watery, and whatever was in the pit destroyed the grain. So you would not have to pay, you'd have to pay for the animal that you damaged, but you wouldn't have to pay for the grain. Okay, so that's how the Gemara saves the Rabbanan. So now the Gemara says, okay, but maybe we could save Rabbi Yehuda also in this case of Aish. How are we going to do that? Well, remember in Aish it said that the Aish is obligated for things that are fitting and not fitting, and the bor is only obligating on things which are fitting. So we said that's kalim. So the Gemara is going to say, well, maybe things which are fitting are stones. Okay, so what does that mean? That if a fire breaks out and it damages a stone wall, it makes it all black and charcoal and bursts the stones, whatever. So you have to pay. But in a pit, if stones were being carried by the animal, fell into the pit and they were broken, then you wouldn't have to pay. So the Gemara says they redefine what it means for Uri, and they save the Gemara. And they say the Bryce is really Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, I'm going very quickly because I really just want to show you the Shakavatari. Okay, now the Gemara says, wait a minute, we have another problem because there's something else left out of this Mishnah, and that's called Pesule Migdashim. Okay, if a person has a korban and it has a mum, it has some sort of blemish, he can't offer it up. So if a shore gores that item, that korban, which is pasul, which can't be used, you have to pay for it. But if it falls into a pit, you don't have to pay for it. We'll get into all those details. So the fact that it was left out in the ratio, this distinction, is not a problem to the Rabbanan because we say Tana B'Shayar, just like he left out Tam and he left out this case. But this case should have been brought in the ratio of Pesule Kedoshim because you're telling me it's Chayiv and Shur and Pater and Bor. So the Gemara tries to say, so the Gemara says, well, maybe he left something else out. What was that? Dash Beniro. The animal steps on a furrow and destroys the plowed field. So he said, no, that's just a question of regal, so we're stuck. Now, the reason why I wanted to present this to you, and I did it very quickly, we did many hours of study of this with some of the other guys in the group, but the reason why I wanted to present this to you is to show you that there's an argument flow. And the Ramchal explains in this book that what the Gemara is trying to do is trying to find out the truth about this first brisa. What actually, who's the author of it? But in order to do that, it has to now bring both internal problems and external problems, okay? And it tries to fit the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda into this brisa. And this is called Shakavatara. And since it has a difficulty with Rabbi Yehuda in the final analysis, so it's going to say this brisa is not Rabbi Yehuda, but the only, and is a Rabbanan. But in order to do that, it had to go through this process of mas and matan, which is give and take. Now, this is a typical sugia, but it's a very deep sugia, and it requires a lot of time to go into every single step, okay? So I don't expect you to catch it right away, but I just wanted to, for completeness sake, to show you how the sugia develops and this idea of the back and forth analysis of the text until we get exactly what is the truth of the text, i.e. that it's the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so now that's all I just want to bring to us an introduction, long introduction. So the real work I want to do with you today is to slow down, go to the next piece of Gemara, and to slow down with you and go step by step into this next piece, okay? Oops, screen sharing has stopped. Okay, so I am now going to Okay, now I'm going to slow down. I just want to have that on record that we did it. Okay, I mean that we at least we went through it quickly. Okay, so now this Gemara, if you notice my little charting of this Gemara, has a lot of stops and goes in it. Okay, so we're going to do an analysis to try to find out again exactly what position this Mishnah is going to be holding. Okay, so if you remember the Mishnah in the second part, it first said if you do a little bit of damage, you're obligated on all the damage. Okay, so now what does it mean if you do a little bit of damage? You're obligated on all the damages. Now, by the way, I hope I put this in class notes. Okay, what I did here very simply is I took Saphiria. I used to do it myself, but now that they've done it, they've done a great job. So I just copied and pasted their stuff, and I put it on the left-hand side of the chart. So this is the English, and this is the Hebrew. Now notice, I pointed out once before here, there's the bold text in the Saphiria notes, and then there's the unbolded text. Why do they do that? Because the words of the Gemara are extremely brief. And in order to, and that's why they highlight or they bold the words of the Gemara. But to express the words of the Gemara properly to an English audience, they have to spell everything out, which means they have to spell out all the background and the premises that you have to know. This is one of the difficulties or challenges, let's call it, in the modern day language of learning Gemara. You have to be able to be introduced to a lot of these premises, a lot of these background information to understand what it's actually doing. Okay, so let's go into the text. The text here in our Mishnah said, if you did a little bit of damage, you prepared a little bit of the damager, then you're going to be obligated to pay everything. Very unusual case, right? What does it mean? I mean, you just have a shore with two legs and you're obligated on what it does. What does it mean preparing a little bit of the damager? Okay, so here it says. So we bring again a brisa that's going to explain what it means that you've done a little bit of the damage, you create a little bit of the damage, and because you've done a little bit of the damage, you have to pay all of the payment. So here we're going to go a little slow, okay? The brisa says, first quotes our Mishnah, mixas nisko, chayavti b'tishlumi nisko kehekshikol nisko. When you do a little bit of the preparation of the damager, then you're going to be obligated to pay for all of the damage. So the first thing the brisa says is ketzad. What does the Mishnah mean? What's the case where you do a little bit of the damaging agent and you have to pay for everything? So the Gemara says, the brisa says ketzad. What case are we talking about? So here's the case. Hachofa bor tesha. Mr. A, we'll call him Reuven, digs a pit 9 tvachim deep. Okay, tefach is a handbreadth. Okay, so Reuven digs a pit 9 tvachim deep. Uba acher, we'll call him Shimon, comes along. V'hashlinu la'asera. He takes the 9, he goes down into the bottom of the pit, and he pulls out one more tefach, okay, and one more handbreadth. Ha'achron chayev. So Shimon now is chayev. Now, what does that mean? Well, chayev on what? We have to discuss. Now, we know that a bore of 9, you have to pay if an animal got damaged inside the bore. But if he died inside the bore, then we say the animal must have had some sort of problem, because normal animals don't die in a bore of 9. So the bore that was originally dug by Reuven was only 9 tvachim deep. Okay, not enough to kill an animal. Okay, comes along Shimon, and now he makes it into a killer boar. What does he do? He adds 1 tefach. Now the pit is 10 tvachim deep, and since it's 10 tvachim deep, it can kill an animal. So the rule here is, since he added the extra tefach at the end, he has to pay for all the damages, and the first one doesn't pay for anything. Okay. All right. Now the question is, are we talking about damage, or are we talking about injury? So if we're talking about damage, it's going to work out very nicely because, excuse me, if we're talking about death, not injury, it'll work out nicely. Why? Because the second person came along and he made this 9 tvachim pit into a killer pit. So he's the one that converted the regular boar of 9 into a killer pit. So since he did the final act of creating a killer boar, so if the animal dies in that pit, he'll have to pay, and the first one doesn't have to pay. Okay? That would be the simple meaning of this text. Okay, so a person can do only a little bit of a pit. He only adds 1 tefach to a 9 pit already, and yet he has to pay for everything, because before the pit could only damage, and now it could kill. Is that clear? What's going on here?
It's pretty clear, but technically speaking, the person who dug the first 9, he also did a part of the he also fits into the language of b'mekatzas nizko. So I guess the Kate side is telling us specifically what the Mishnah means when it's saying if you facilitate part, then you're chayav for the whole. Is the case specifically where you do the latter part is the example of that. But technically speaking, you could fit into the language. The person who did the first 9 also, he could be chayav according to that Mishnah's language.
So the question is, he could be chayav on what? On what would be chayav? The pit now is 10. The pit is now 10.
He did part.
The pit is 10, correct?
Pay for the whole.
How could he do part? He
first
didn't do what
9,
he did,
part.
but that 9 was not capable of killing the animal.
Okay.
So
we know
it's
that
like,
once we see the Kate side, we know that. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, but that's the reality, right? He only did 9. So and let's say he only did 9, and an animal fell into the pit and died. So he wouldn't have to pay anything, because he didn't kill the animal. The animal must have been sick to die in a pit of 9. So the simple speaking here, what we're talking about is the second person who made it into a killer pit. He's the one that pays, and the first one who didn't make a killer pit doesn't have to pay. Okay, that would be the simple pshat. Now, after the Brisa brings this case of a person doing the 10th tefach and he has to pay for everything, the Gemara now makes an observation, and it says this Brisa cannot be like Rebbe. Why? Because we have another interesting case where we'll see that Rebbe would say that they're both chayav. Let's see what's going on here. We have a Brisa, another Brisa, right? Notice what the Gemara is doing. It has the Mishnah. It wants to solve the Mishnah. In order to solve the Mishnah, it's bringing these braitot to clarify what the Mishnah means. Okay, very important move of the Gemara, because as we said, that the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi made a very compact, formulated Mishnayos by grabbing. He took all the Talmudei Chachamim of the times, brought them all together, and they banged out a very precise text. Now, a lot of things were left out, not because they were wrong, but because they were not needed. They still should have been held in the head. Because remember, all this information was held orally. People had a mind that they used and intensively. Okay, so now the Gemara comes along and it brings the Mishnah, but it needs help in understanding the Mishnah, so it brings the Brises, which are going to clarify the Mishnah like this one, which just clarifies it. But the Gemara does more than that, and it says, wait a minute, this Brisa that you brought, very nice, and the way you explained it, it's very nice. That goes according to the Rabbanan, but it won't fit according to Rebbe. Why? Because we have another Brisa that will explain the same situation and come up to the conclusion that the last one is not chayav. Let's see what the Brisa says. Achofa bor tesha. Okay. A man digs a pit of 9. Same thing as the first case. Ubo acher b'shlim l'asara. And that's Shimon comes along and he makes it into 10. Exactly the case in the first Brisa. So the Tanakama, the first person mentioned, says the Achron is chayav, just like we learned in the first Brisa. Since the second one did the killing pit, so he's chayav, and the first one didn't make a killing pit, he just made a damaging pit. But lo and behold, Rebbe has a different position. That was the Tanakama fits into our Brisa very nicely. The last one has to pay. What does Rebbe say? Rebbe says, Acher Achron Lamisa. You're right. When it comes to Misa, when it comes to the animal dying in the pit, I agree with you that the only one that has to pay is the one that added the last tefach. But he says, look what he says, Acher Shnehem L'Nezikin. But say the animal now only gets damaged in the 10 tvachim pit. Who has to pay? You have a pit that's 10 tvachim. The first Reuven made 9, and Shimon added 1 tefach. Now the animal did not die. He only got injured. So who has to pay? So Rebbe says they both have to pay. Because the first one made the pit of 9, but the second one added to that pit. Very interesting. What would you say? New Reb Deva, what would you say? You have 2 people that make a pit of, actually the first one makes a pit of 9, and the second one makes a pit, adds 1 tefach to it. An animal falls in, and he only gets injured. He doesn't die. If he died, Rebbe says, no question about it, the second guy has to pay for everything because he made the. But what happens if they're injured?
I would say the same as when it died.
You would say that what? The same that the Shimon has to pay for everything?
Yes, but the rabbis don't say that.
What? Yeah, Rebbe.
I don't understand why.
So you would say it should have the same law, right?
Yes.
But why would it have the same law? Because the first one made already a damaging pit. So the second one didn't do anything. What did he do? He didn't add to it. He did. The animal didn't get damaged because he added to it.
I got you. All right. Okay. The nine tefach pit one is a damaging pit as well.
He already made a damaging pit.
Yeah, okay, right? I got it. Yeah.
So he should pay because he made a damaging pit. You added on 1 tefach to it. Why should that make a difference? What do you say here? This is an interesting question. The animal now gets damaged in this 10 tefachim pit. The first guy did 9, and the second person added 1 tefach. Now that 1 tefach did not, what did the 1 tefach do? It didn't make the animal get injured because that was already done in the 9. So why should he have to pay at all? He didn't do anything. But Rebbe
Well,
says,
you know,
no.
you could argue that injury takes place on a spectrum, and that something that is a certain size, if it's a larger size, it'll injure more. So that would be the argument, to say that the second person should have some responsibility. And then, you know, if you just want to say that injury is injury and it's the same amount no matter what, then you could say that the second person didn't do anything substantial. He didn't cause it to go from injury to death. It's injury to injury, and it's the injury and injury are the same, and therefore the first person's chayav. Yeah.
So then why would Rebbe say that the second one is chayav also? Rebbe says the second one is also. And that really, in other words, our brisa says well, now this goes against the brisa also, which I don't understand. The brisa says the last person is chayav, okay? So that's good when it comes to death, right? But what about when it comes to injury? Why is the last person chayav?
He could have filled in the pit.
He could have filled it in. He was negligent because he didn't fill it in. But what he did do was he added to the pit. Well, what does adding to the pit have to do with anything? Let's see what Rashi says here. Let's see if we can get Rashi. Yeah, an interesting problem, logic problem, right? Ha'achon chayev. This is Rashi. Ben meis hashor uben huzak. Very interesting. So the way that Rashi sets up the case is that when we said that there was 9 first, and then Shimon did 10, right? So Rashi wants to say that that's whether the animal died or was injured. In both cases, he pays. Interesting. Why is that? And Rashi says the time of Meforish L'Kama, the reason why the last one pays will be explained to us later on in the Gemara. Mikra'oi, from Pesukim, the Perek Shor and Hapara. Oh, wow. Rashi refers us, because he knows all of Shas. It's like we know, different rooms in our home. He knows all of Shas, and he says, "Well, I understand. You should have a little bit of a consternation here. Why should the last one be chayav? And the first one not?" He says only the last one is fired according to the Tanakh. Only the last one. He says that's a question of pesukim that we'll have to learn later on. So maybe next week when we discuss this very interesting case, we'll do our research over there, and we'll have to see how come the second one is only the second one is chayav. Very strange, right? So we'll just have to hold off on that until we do the research. But acher achron lemisa. So Rebbe said when it comes to death, the Tanakhama says both death and injury the same. We always stick it on the last person. Comes along Rebbe and says it's not true. Acher la'achron lemisa. Im meis hashor. We're talking about the shore dies, right? Lo yishalom arishon klum. Achron lamisa means that the first one doesn't pay anything at all. The teisha tvachim ein behen kedei lahamis. So here Rashi explains why. 9 tvachim was never enough to kill the animal. So you can't blame the second one. He didn't do anything. He said, I didn't kill the animal. I only built a bore of 9. I didn't do it 10. So you can't blame the first one, right? So they all agree with that. It's not true. According to Rashi, when we said the Yachon is chayav in the first position, he's always chayav death or injury. Okay, so let's make a little chart here so we don't get lost, and I don't get lost here. Okay, let's let's make a little chart here. Okay, so we have the Tanakama here, the first position, right? That's the Tanakama. And then we have Rebbe Yehuda. Oops. Okay, so let me add another column above this. Okay. All right, and we have how many cases here? We have 2 cases, correct? Right? We have the case of, well, it's the same case.
Maybe four cases. And not, I guess you could say 9 that.
Oh,
injured
so now we're gonna have
others.
to, now we're gonna have to make a little more sophisticated, right? We're gonna have to call, well, it's the same case, it's 9 plus 1. That the case is not gonna change, correct? 9 is done by Shimon and 10 is done by Reuben. Excuse me, Reuben does 9 and Shimon does 10. So the case is not going to change, right? What is going to change? One is going to be if the animal only gets injury. Oops, wrong language. Let's see. Injury. Okay, and death. Okay, so we have 2 occurrences here, right? Okay, and this is going, that's injury, and we're going to call this the law. What is the law? Who pays, right? So I'm just going to make this here. Okay, all right. So what does the Tana Kama say? Well, this actually is not so simple. We have to add another column here. Okay. So we have a law when it comes to a law when it comes to injury, right? And we have a law when it comes to death, right? So what does the Tanakama hold? According to Rashi, Rashi says, Achron is chayev ben meis bo hashor ben huzik bo. So the Tanakama says the law is an injury, who pays?
Achron, the second person.
Or the last or the second, whatever you want to call him, okay? Call him the second one. And that's whether it's death or injury, correct? In both cases, is right?
Yes,
Correct?
yes.
Good. But Rebbe says, Acher Achron Lemisa, he says, I agree with you. If he dies In the case of death, the second person has to pay. But he says, Acher shnehem l'nezikin. Dim huzek ashur below me shishlam ben shnehem. So both have to pay here. So the Tanna Kama holds in the case of injury or death, the second one has to pay. And we can't understand that. Okay, because when it came to death, this case is understood, correct? That case we can understand because he made the pit, that was the killing pit, right? But how come when it comes to the injury, he also has to pay? He didn't create a killing boar. Excuse me, he didn't create, excuse me, he created a boar that could injure. It could also kill too, but he also, but the, excuse me, the first one also created a boar that can injure, correct? Let me just straighten this down here.
I guess that's why Rashi had to say, "But taima mafarish lekaman," that it'll be, the reason will be explained later because we're going to be bothered by this.
Okay, so Rashi says it's Pesukim. Somehow they learn from Pesukim that the first one also pays. Excuse me, that only the second one pays, right?
Hello. Fine, how are you?
Okay, Esther, I just have to. So that we're going to have to leave for next week and have to look at the Pesukim and see how they come to that conclusion. Okay.
I don't know what it is. Oh, okay.
Okay, I goofed this up tremendously. I don't know what I did here. But, okay. Anyway, you got the idea. All right. So that's exactly what Rashi says. He's got an experience. It's Pesukim. Okay. Now, what about Rebbe? Rebbe says, okay, they both pay because they both made an injuring boar. The second one added to the boar, but you could say the first one did everything, right? Because he already made the injuring boar. What did the second guy do? He did nothing. The boar is already an injuring boar. So by adding the one, he didn't do anything. So David said, well, maybe he made it more of an injury. Okay, so then you're going to have to figure out. But the Tanna Kama says, excuse me, Rebbe Yehuda say they both have to pay. They both have to pay. So what? He pays for his injury, and the other one pays for more. It's hard to say. They're going to evaluate. No matter what injury happens, you have to pay for everything up to death. You have to pay for. Okay, but all injury you have to pay. So what's the difference? Why should the second one be involved at all? He didn't do anything. It was already a damaging boar. So what did I do? I made it more of a damager. Interesting. Okay, interesting. This is the problem. Okay, so we're going to have to investigate this. There's no way out. We have to do the research because it doesn't. Okay, Rashi doesn't help us enough. The only one that makes sense is this case, if you ask me, right? This makes sense because when in case of death, he's the one that made the killing bore. That makes sense, right? But an injury, why should he all of a sudden take all the responsibility? That doesn't make sense. It's a question. We understand that. And according to Rebbe Yehuda, why do both have to pay? I would say only the first one should pay, not the second one at all, right? He was the one that made the injuring bore. The second one didn't do anything special. And in the case of death, so, okay, that's the same thing. He has the same law. So they both agree in death, actually, right? Of course, in death, in both these cases of death, the second one made it into a killer bore. So that makes a lot of sense. But this first argument, I would say, either the first one should pay everything and the second one didn't do anything if it's injury. That's what I would say.
Or could it be that the second one should have closed up the bore?
That's what David said. He should have covered it up.
Okay, well said, David.
The only problem
I think
is
the rabbi said it to me the other day. That's why I said it.
whatever it is, but okay, he could have covered it up. He didn't cover it up, but that means whose bore was it anyway? It's very interesting. We're talking about Rishus Rabbin here, right? The public area. That's when you hire on board. In your own backyard, if someone falls into a pit, it's their problem. What are they doing? Oh, if you invited them in, there's another problem. But normally, if a person trespasses, it's their problem. But so we're talking about a pit that was dug in the private area, in the public area. I'm sorry, it was bit in the public area, and then there's a special law that the Hashem will have to read the Pesukim. That's what they'll probably be involved in. The pit becomes yours, okay, when you dig it. So the second guy didn't dig a pit; he just made the pit a little deeper. So why does he have to pay at all? Very interesting. So that's where we're holding. Let's go back to the text. I see we'll have a problem here. Okay. Just gonna put down a little chart here that we made. Okay. So that's as far as this text is concerned, okay? Let's see what he says here. Maybe he helps us. Now, let's go back. How does this impact on our first case? So we also have to remember, because it is the first case. The first case is exactly that, but in our brisa, it says if you did a little bit of the damage, you have to pay for all of the damage. So that goes good if we're talking about if the animal died. If you made it 10 and the animal died, that works out very, very good. Okay, good. So that's okay. Okay. The sage of the Brisa taught that elucidates the Mishnah ruling in any case, which I feel, okay. How so? In the case of one who's okay, we did this, and it okay. According to Allah, the course of death of the latter is. So let's read what he says here slowly, okay? How so? In the case of one who digs a pit at a depth of 9 handbreadths, and another person comes along and completes the digging to the depth of 10 handbreadths. All right. The depth the depth at which a pit, according to halacha, can cause death. So only the latter individual is liable for injuries of death caused by the pit. Although the pit was already able to cause injury before the second individual deepened it, since the deepening it, he increased the capacity to cause damage. Although the pit was already able to cause injury before the second individual deepened it, good, right? Reuven did a 9, so that since by deepening it, the pit to 10, he increased its capacity to cause damage, he becomes liable for any damage it causes. That's a very, very sneaky way of saying it, but that's what he says. The way he wants to learn is that I increased, the person who did 10 increased its ability to do harm. So since I increased the ability to do harm, I also am responsible. You see how he's learning? It's true, it would have done harm at 9. But I increased its, I even made it even more dangerous. So making something even more dangerous means I am now a participant in the bore. Okay. So now, but again, we have to talk about the source. So how does that, since it's like I made a new pit now, I made the pit even more dangerous. By making it more dangerous, it's like a new pit. I'm just trying to figure it out, Jim. I'm trying to work it out. It's an interesting problem. How does it? Why do I let the first guy off the hook? The first guy, he also made a damaging pit. How did he get off the hook? Okay, how do you get off the hook? If I made it more damaging, very nice. So you have to say somehow I changed the pit into a different pit by making it more damaging, and therefore I'm responsible. We'll have to look at that. Okay, well, next time that's first. Now we're just getting into the problem. I mean, we're going to have to now do research and find out what people say. The Gemara suggests, and this is not according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, as it is taught in a brisa. We have this other brisa. In the case of one who digs a pit to the depth of 9 handbreadths, and another comes along and completes the digging to the depth of 10 handbreadths, only the latter individual is liable, and he adds, like for both injuries and death. It's not clear that's what it means, but Rashi explains that. Okay, so the second one is, well, what does he say here? No, in the second one, yeah, the Tanna Kama holds only the second one pays, whether it's injury or death. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi says, no, with regard to death caused by the pit, the responsibility is ascribed to the latter. With regard to damage caused, the responsibility is ascribed to both of them. Which makes a little bit more sense because we both participated in making a damaging pit, right? You made a damaging pit of 9 and I increased its ability to damage. That's how we learned this very nice slur. I increased its ability to damage. So I don't get you off the hook, says Rabbi Yehuda. I don't get you off the hook because Shimon, the second guy, he also, by increasing the ability to damage, he's a participant in making the pit. That's how he's learning. Not like me. I said he didn't do anything, the second guy. But the way that the Sefiria is learning here is that no, since I made it into a more damaging item, I have to take responsibility for it also, because I'm also the cause of the damage, because I made it even a greater pit. Okay, but in the case of death, of course, then I have to pay, the second guy pays for everything. Okay, so we'll stop here. Very interesting problem, no? This is a thinking man's problem. We have to get the facts and then we have to think about it and how it's going to work together. Okay, so we have the second person. Well, I'll leave it at this and then we'll pick it up next week. But we have a lot to think about over the weekend. By the way, I always put these notes in the WhatsApp group app. So if you hope you have, or David can send it out individually to anyone on the email list. Okay, but Interesting questions here. All right. So you'll think about it. Next week, we'll do some research. We'll come back with some interesting solutions. Have a great week. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.
All right, thank you, Rabbi.
Cool.